All right, we're back at the Cracks in Postmodernity. Today we have Evelyn Quartz, who used to work on Capitol Hill as a freelance writer, as a very successful Substack. Evelyn, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
So, as I was saying to you before, I mean, I found your work through Compact first, and then I started following your Substack. And, I find it very refreshing to hear voices that are critical of the kind of mainstream political paradigm, particularly of the mainstream left, that are intelligent and don't just resort to reactionary, kind of emotionally fueled rhetoric. I mean, your critique is something very, again, it's intelligent, it's very specific, and I feel like it opens the door to like having substantial conversations rather than these kind of emotionally heated back and forths. So, before we get into some of the recent pieces that you've written, tell people a little bit about your own background.
Yeah, awesome. So I got out of college and immediately started working in these kind of institutions. I started working in DC at like a polling firm, just very mainstream Democratic firm. And then when I was about 24, started working on Capitol Hill.
Wow.
Yeah, and I worked there for 6 years, which felt like a long time, but I guess it's not that long, but yeah. And so I left that a couple years ago, and I joined um, this one of the big kind of pro-democracy, quote unquote, super PACs that was trying to defeat Trump. And basically, I ended up leaving that campaign that December and became very disillusioned with sort of my role in the whole political like consultant complex.
Mhm.
And I was sitting with it. I was thinking, not really sure what I wanted to do next. Like, I really didn't want to go back and do campaign stuff. So I started the Substack just as a way to kind of work through what I was thinking and it kind of started, to be totally honest, as like a resistance page because that's where my mind was at the
Yeah.
time, which is crazy because now I'm very, very critical of that kind of politics. Um, but yeah, I think the first kind of big piece that I did was in the compact essay. That
Mhm.
was in May, where I basically just railed on the organizations that I used to work for, saying that they are been captured by sort of this elite game that consultants play with each other, in which they just use and manipulate voter sort of they have the whole system, right? It's like they're polling, the metrics, the messaging, the ads.
Yeah.
It's just this very insulated, very detached business model, essentially, where they kind of play this game of how can we, win people's vote and get their money. And that's to them, that's like democracy. And I can get into my bigger critique of the whole pro-democracy movement, because I think that at the end of the day, it's kind of just like a very cynical grift, which is sort of this liberal class who clearly has been like defeated right by Trump, um, refusing to reckon with the conditions that brought Trump to power,
Mhm.
and instead using this whole like Trump's a Hitler, Trump's the singular villain from like Germany and another era, right? Like they have no conception that their policies created Trump. Trump is the symptom. He's not some random um, like threat that's gonna. I mean, he is a threat to their power, but he comes from this sort of neoliberal, talk about that era and all this. So yeah, that's my broader critique. That's how I kind of got into this, and it's really nice to find spaces. Like I really appreciate what you guys have done at Compact and other really heterodox thinkers because that's where I've found like the most excitement intellectually is these
Mhm.
heterodox spaces where you don't have to be tied to ideology sort of as this dogmatic worldview. And I think it's where like the most interesting conversations come out of. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that's why I'm saying there's something very refreshing because it feels like finally you can breathe when you hear voices like yours that are breaking through the discord, which is again like it feels like you can't get anywhere with it because it's so detached from reality and committed to ideologies rather than,
Yeah.
what's really needed on the ground. So I mean, at what point did you did you have like your first awakening? At what point did you start to see through the kind of BS of the kind of
Yeah.
circles that you were in?
I started reading, do you ever know James Pogue? He,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I started, I don't even know how I found him, but I got into his stuff and was like, wow, this guy's thinking on sort of another level. He had also written a lot of critiques of Democrats, but he does like that very good narrative nonfiction journalism, where he just is kind of a fly on the wall and makes his points. But I think there was something about the way that he saw the world that exposed me and sort of led me down this like rabbit hole of other thinkers. I got really into like Chris Hedges, people like that, who had stepped out of the system. Like Hedges used to work at the New York Times, and he talks a lot about how like careerism is a disease and
Mm.
how like and Noam Chomsky too. Remember Noam Chomsky had this famous interview where the mainstream news guy was like, "Well, I'm not brainwashed," and Noam Chomsky's like, "I'm sure you believe what you're saying, but if you did it, you wouldn't be sitting there." And so I had this kind of like, whoa, almost like Matrixy moment where I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, this is like, I've been totally um, just a pawn for the system kind of. And this is what really scares me. And I don't like, it, I find it to be like the kind of big existential question is how do we, like most people in journalism or in government, media, just think they're doing their jobs.
Mhm.
But they don't realize that there's this sort of like matrixy, and you remember like in Brave New World when they, like people who finally figured it out that the whole thing was like a simulation, they get banished to an island and the,
Mhm.
the controller's like, don't worry, you'll be happier there, like you can think.
Yeah.
But you have to give up everything that was comfortable in your life, like all of this like hedonistic pleasures and stuff. And I think that when I realized that there were people who had done that, I was like, wow, this is like a much more no, not that I'm like that, but just a more noble pursuit of like politics because I think it is still, I mean, political and um, the interesting critiques about journalists too, I think is um, like this idea that they're objective. Like, they have an agenda too, right? Mainstream media is so connected to these institutions, like the ones I used to work for, that they're basically just like earpieces for the administration. So I was really inspired by like the growing movement of independent journalism. I've always really liked like Glenn Greenwald, people like
Mhm.
that, because they also can speak to this like like you said earlier, they're not in the rat race of the
Mhm.
two-party binary.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of the Matrix, there's this, I feel like a Baudrillardian experience when
Yeah.
reading voices like yours, because I mean, and this goes to your point that you often hit on about the nature of technocracy, this kind of the technocratic paradigm of power that really, first of all, fosters all these simulations, all these kinds of ideas, all these structures that are very much detached from life on the ground, from, real people's actual needs. And you see that, I mean, I think there are like two levels here. First off, there's the level of organization that like we have all these kinds of resistance movements. We have all kinds of social movements. But the model, it's no longer this grassroots model that's born from the agency, everyday people who are, taking charge of their lives using, the power that they have to affect substantial, measurable changes. Now it's these very symbolic or simulational changes that, I mean, may be motivated by positive intentions, but in reality don't accomplish very much. But and aside from the like the structural organizational level, there's the discursive dimension of this, which again you hit on a lot when you talk about resistance politics, that so much of these notions of being radical, of resisting, of revolution have been co-opted by elite interests. And again, this is part and parcel of this technocratic paradigm where it's again,
Mhm.
you can say power to the people, you can say, we're rising up, but in reality, it's the technocrats who retain all the power and they're using these discursive tools to distract from what's actually happening. So kind of going back to Brave New World. So I mean, I want to get into the examples both on again, like the organizational and discursive levels that you bring up. And I think so, yeah, like one of the pieces that struck me most was the one on Charlie Kirk, because I don't know, like that week I kind of went crazy because I felt like, okay, clearly we're living in a simulation. Clearly
Yeah,
there's more going on than just, this guy was shot.
yeah,
And all the rhetoric that was coming out after from the left and the right, I was just like, we realize this is not realistic at all. Um, and my mind is quick to go to all kind of conspiratorial
yeah,
ideas. But then I saw your piece, in addition to several others that like were really grounding. I was like, okay, this is what's going on. I mean, like you explicitly address the kind of technocratic element to, what's going on here. So let's start with Charlie Kirk. Tell us a little bit about your take and, what you saw going on in the aftermath.
yeah. I think I wrote a piece called like "Nothing Feels Real" about
Yeah.
that,
Hmm.
and it was also just about gun violence in general and the liberal take on gun violence.
Yeah.
Um, so when you have this whole, I guess, backing up a little bit, the technocratic worldview has this assumption that these are just we've been elected, like the experts have been, or not elected, the experts are in control, and we're going to use these measures of things like metrics and data to basically just like understand the people below us. And if we can convince them that these metrics are getting better, then our legitimacy is fine.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that is very obvious. It's so obviously divorced from reality. And I think I made this point too when um, Trump sent the military or whoever he sent the whatever into Washington, D.C., where the liberals were saying things like, well, crime's down like 18% in the past 10 years. So, it's fine. There's no problem. And I think it's the same with like with gun violence, right? It's like if we can just take away, make these little tweaks about in the laws, and we're not going to address like why people are alienated and why people would. I mean, I'm conspiratorial with you too. I think the guy who did it, like the whole Israel thing, there's all that that's like really interesting. But like we're not going to talk about these, causes that we don't fundamentally see as political, right? They don't see like the crisis of young people chronically online. It's like political. They see like technocratic. Can we log this person into like an FBI surveillance database as like the peak of their imagination with the solutions? And to me, like this is just such a failing model of governance. And I think it, especially too, like with the issue in DC, this is where Trump has such an advantage because he can at least admit that, like, yeah, cities have become really rough and like shitty, and like there is crime, and just because there's like a little bit less than there was last year doesn't mean that we shouldn't treat it as an emergency.
Yeah.
And so yeah, this is where I think it gets really interesting, where the the technocracy stuff deserves like to be scrutinized because, and that's what I try to do, thinking like, really, like this is the ceiling of what our politics is for. Like it must be wrong for that, right? There must be something else here. So yeah.
Yeah, no, and I mean, so then that leads me to the other article that you wrote about No Kings and
Yeah.
how just I mean tying the two together that like we we turn to these kind of like bureaucratic solutions, as you say, whether it's I don't know to regulate like these extreme leftists who are now becoming violent, or to regulate gun violence. But again, back on the ground, like we don't really have many avenues to like use our agency to affect changes concretely. And like you say with No Kings, it's this very symbolic form of resistance, which is a kind of desperate attempt to claim our agency to do something. But in reality, it's like been completely co-opted. And you reference some examples from like the nation's founding that
Yeah.
I mean, say a little bit more about this because I think there's an interesting connection here.
Yeah, the connection I kind of tried to make is that, and this is, I think, a more bigger issue of discussion around liberalism, but like John Locke in the believed that legitimacy was derived from the consent of the governed, right? And Thomas Jefferson put that in the Declaration of Independence.
Hmm.
And their whole thing was we're going to break from a monarchy, this king, and we're going to decide that like if our government no longer serves the people, it can be overthrown. Like that's a pillar of
Hmm.
liberalism that people
Yeah.
don't. right? They've like that's not really talked about. So yeah, with no kings, I mean, it's not just that Trump, oh, first of all, Trump's not a king, right? Like he's elected. Um, it's not that it's just about getting rid of one bad king. And that narrative in itself allows the liberal class to project all of their failures onto Trump, right? So I think that's like actually the more sinister move in these protests. We're all on the street like decrying Trump, but we're not talking about, austerity or like globalization,
Mhm.
which ironically, like Trump is actually talking about. Um, so yeah, I think it's really unfortunate too because I get a lot of people who say, "Well, what do you want me to do? Like, this is what I was told to do." And I think that's the sad part. A lot of well-meaning people want to be involved in these fundamentally democratic movements. It's just that the options were being provided in the whole broader resistance um, ecosystem. And this includes a lot of the groups I've been very critical of, like the 50, I always forget it, 5001 or whatever, Indivisible, groups like this, which I think are just really trying to harness the sort of liberal outrage to regain their own power. And that's what I want people to be wary of. And I think that until these movements, I mean, this has been an issue too with protests for a long time, right? They've become very like depoliticized. Um, but when you have the liberal class that's out of power having such a stake in these protests succeeding, I think that's a big red flag.
Yeah, and I mean, so just like going back to the topic of, the early days of the nation,
Mhm.
I can't help but think of de Tocqueville and I mean his kind of warnings, his hope, but also the warnings that he issued about the nation that ultimately, like if you don't have strong civil society, local institutions, but also like a moral framework, religion,
Yeah.
whatever, it's inevitable that, democracy is going to veer towards despotism behind the facade of, the facade is we still have a democracy there. And I mean, I think this is ultimately what technocracy is. It's democracy as a facade masking, despotic kind of authoritarian power.
Yes.
And this is the issue that like you said, people people flock to No Kings protests because again, they see something's wrong. This is the only avenue they feel is available because these smaller institutions no longer exist.
Yeah.
What else am I supposed to do? And I mean, I know, so you said that you were reading Christopher Lasch
Yeah, I was just gonna
recently.
go there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I want to talk about this because Lash kind of envisioned this, you know, kind of recovering this populist ideal of, first of all, claiming our agency as everyday people, building strong civic society, strong communities, with, again, like with this left populist bent. I don't know. I mean, is that even feasible anymore, or is this option kind of just gone out the window? I don't know. What do we make of this?
Yeah. I really liked Lash's analysis here. I think um going fundamentally back to this. I think it actually, so if you go back to like maybe it was the neoliberal kind of era that triggered
Mhm.
this, but it seems like there was this assumption that we could all become he talks a lot about like meritocracy too and this like social like mobility. So if there's this idea that like the purpose of or the good, like the vision of the good, is that we all become these cosmopolitan
Yeah.
globalists, like elites, right? These, um, and I think that's been the sort of the bigger problem for liberalism as of late. I know you've done a lot and you're interested in this too.
Yeah.
That if liberalism only has this sort of universalized idea of the good, which is very much like tied to capitalism and war and like these bigger projects, imperialism, uh, what happens to the people who are want to live like ordinary lives? They've just been told that they're like the losers of society.
Mhm.
And I think this is obviously like what Trump broke open, was this like this fantasy that we could all become these cosmopolitan elites, and that we'd have no ties to our community. Uh, and more than that, like that was the ideal, right? That we would be like so mobile we wouldn't have to have a community. But like as Lash says, the community is the foundation of democracy. So how can you have a functioning democracy when you just have all these rootless people? So yeah, I don't know. I think this is, and I know you do a lot of stuff on like the post-liberal movement and everything. I do wonder like what it will take, um, and if it's possible even that we can have some sort of um movement. I'm curious too, like what you think in terms of how like the zeitgeist around this. Is it on, and I think this is too like where kind of the heterodox, like, is it on the right? Is it on the left? I know like the liberals have or like the left has a different like vision around pluralism and all this, but I think it's a really interesting area.
Yeah, I mean, my like very simplistic solution is to build up local community and civic society. I mean, it's easier
Yeah.
said than done, but I'm just like, this is all we have left because at the national, federal level, I really don't have much hope. But I do think it is possible for someone to go around, first of all, to get to know their neighbors. Most people don't even
Hmm.
know who's living next to them, but to try to build up institutions at the local level that can reclaim agency and do actual things to make people's lives better. Again, I think it's hard because of how expansive the reach of like, technocratic power has become, and also how like bureaucratic the structure is. It's super hard to make any changes within that kind of structure. But I mean, yeah, this is why I like kind of platforming communitarian, localist kind of initiatives. But I mean, on this topic though of like, left versus right. So I mean, you've written about Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I mean, it's interesting to me how, okay, like the left has kind of taken this language of resistance to use it against Trump, so the enemy is Trump. And I mean, so with Trump 2.0, I kind of you see the right appropriating this language of resistance, now using it against their enemy, the woke left. And again, using this kind of right populist rhetoric, which personally I am very suspicious of. Like, I think it's like, I don't think this is a true populism. I don't think this is what Lash was talking about, like actually bringing
Yeah.
power back to smaller institutions. Um, so I don't know. I mean, let's talk a little bit more about her, but this also kind of like right-wing version of hashtag resistance.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I tried to get at this, Marjorie Taylor Greene. It seems like so all of the liberals, when she started questioning, I think it was around the shutdown in
Mhm.
particular, when she said like, oh yeah, we should pass healthcare and we should open the government, her views on Israel. Um, the liberals say, oh my gosh, like she's with us now. And they try to co-opt her into their movement.
Mhm.
But to me, like Marjorie Taylor Greene is like sure, it might not be a genuine populism, but she's speaking in a whole different dimension than
Yeah.
the liberals exist. Because like I mentioned this in the piece, like Hakeem Jeffries can say like, the system is broken, but nobody believes what he says. Like that's the kind of a ridiculous like he just speaks in these very kind of message
Yeah.
tested talking points. But when Marjorie Taylor Greene says that, it people relate to it sort of from the right and the left. They can't really figure out why.
Mhm.
And I think that's so interesting. And I think this broader, maybe this is what you're talking about with like her and Tucker Carlson, the like Fuentes stuff.
Yeah.
Um, this break, it seems like to me that what they're trying to do is kind of reclaim the America First banner, which
Mhm.
so many people seemed so hopeful that the MAGA movement would embrace. But what we're seeing with Trump is, I mean, he's pulled out of some like internationalist kind of like post-war stuff, but like he's about to do regime change in Venezuela, right? Like, and he's obviously continued to send a ton of money to Israel. Uh, the Ukraine stuff, I think, is a little different, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think that especially the anti-war America First agenda. Yeah, I agree with you that I mean that's not what the populism that we want, but it's at least further than I think what's happening on the left, and like that kind of worries me.
Yeah. I mean, because I'm just a contrarian skeptic by nature,
Yeah.
I'm inclined to say like, okay, this is all BS, kind of a BS form of populism. But I mean, I mean, granted that certain like positive changes have been made. I mean, under both administrations. I mean, Biden made some. positive changes economically for sure. And yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, I can't deny that nothing, I can't say nothing good has happened under Trump. But in it just again, like because my interests are more about the discourse than politics and policy itself, like
yeah,
I do think there is something concerning about the fact that the MAGA right is using this language of populism and, posing as, like we're going to challenge the left-wing bureaucrats, technocrats who, hate everyday Americans. And I'm like, I see people who eat this up, and I'm like, but are they really helping you restore your agency? Like, is it truly a populist movement, or is it just, again, using this facade to draw people in a similar way that the woke left did in the resist?
yeah,
And this is where I want to like go to Zohran Mamdani and what's going on in New York because I mean, several people have commented that Zohran is kind of pulling a left-wing version of what Trump has done, like
yes. Hmm.
appropriating populist language to push, again, like he may enact some policies that are genuinely in favor of the people and, restoring agency. Possible, but I don't think, I mean, when you look at where his money's coming from and just the nature of how he ran the campaign, like that was not a populist campaign. The facade maybe, but at its core, it's not. And this is where I think like, yeah, like I see him as this kind of mirror opposite of Trump using the populist language while pushing a very, an agenda that is going to maintain the power of the big state, that is going to maintain technocratic power, while people are in the streets celebrating, oh, look, now finally we have someone who's going to bring power back to the people, maybe in tiny ways, but I don't think. So again, it's back to this like elite capture, this
Yeah.
co-opting of a certain kind of language that people fall for very easily. So I don't know. I mean, I want to hear some of your thoughts about his campaign and his platform.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I think the parallel is really like spot on with Trump. I was also pretty reluctant. I mean, I was excited by it because it felt like nothing really like good has happened in politics in so long. Like it's like, okay, this is actually, like he's saying these things that are gonna at least challenge
Mhm.
the establishment, which is kind of like my whole project in a way, is
Yeah.
just to like unveil this kind of establishment that is like so fake. Um, but I agree with you. I think I've really become very cynical about placing any sort of hope in like one politician alone. I think that like we've seen with AOC and with Obama, they have just totally become captured by these institutions.
Yeah.
So I don't want to get too excited about Mamdani because I mean, it's a tall task, and it would be really striking, I think, if he broke with um, sort of the existing, like you said, bureaucratic structure in like a really meaningful way. Um, but I do think it's like a little bit of hope. I agree with you though about the broader kind of era that we're in, where everything just feels fake, like fake populism, or just kind of this like nihilist in
Yeah.
a way. Like worldview where yeah, people don't even nothing feels like it's genuine. Someone said to me it feels like we're all just wearing like America's wearing a skin suit. And so we have like this problem where nothing feels authentic or earnest. And I like, yeah, I would like to be able to see Mamdani as this authentic, earnest figure, but I worry that, yeah, he's going to become captured. But I mean, who knows? I think too, in general, like I've been moving away from the electoral politics as sort of the solution because
Yeah.
so many of these, yeah, like this Graham Plattner and all this, like people who seem exciting, they always get absorbed. And I think, like you were saying earlier about community based sort of organizing and being able to like build resistance uh, locally,
Yeah.
that's more hopeful to me than putting my cards and, just kind of watching what happens to Memnoni.
Yeah, because ultimately, like someone who actually posed a threat to the status quo, it's the establishment. Like, I don't think they would have been allowed to have a serious platform and come into power. And I think it's within the like status quo's interest that people like him and even people like Trump do gain positions of power because they utilize this discourse of resistance, but by not enacting it, they serve to neutralize it. So like they take that impulse
Yeah.
and the people's impulse to resist. And it's like, yeah, yeah, we're gonna do it. And then by doing nothing, not
Yeah, and
nothing,
then
but
they just expect that like the
yeah.
pendulum's going to swing back and that's how they're going to regain
And then
power.
it's totally that impulse is neutered then. And
Yeah.
then this is why, like, okay, if you take someone like Curtis Lewa, who's a crazy guy, wouldn't be able to run the city. But that is a real person though. Like
Hmm.
this is like the grassroots kind of candidate who's, came up from nothing, who built his own kind of career, did not have big corporate funding behind him. But also on like a cultural level, like he's a New Yorker, like he's
Yeah.
lived in the city, he knows what life is like, he knows real people. That kind of person could never win. I mean, I don't think it would be allowed to happen, but also it's just not imaginable that that
Yeah.
kind of so I mean, I agree that
Good
like
point.
I'm not going to place my cards in the basket of, electoral politics. But I mean, as I said this in Substack, like the one positive thing that I think could come out of I mean, not just Zohran, but even other like people posing as populists, even from Trump, I'll dare to say, is that like the fact that they use the language at all, even if it's a hollow language of
Yeah.
populism, is that at least it's out there now and it can incite genuine populist or genuine communitarian movements, which, like Trump has done this. We can't deny that he is open the door to people who genuinely want to serve the common good and like build, something outside the status quo, the establishment. And I think in New York, I hope that Zoran is going to inspire actual grassroots people to take action and again to use at least that language in a genuine way. We'll
Yeah.
see. But I mean, I do want to bring up the fact that Zoran did appoint Lina Khan to his transitional team. That to me, I was like, okay, this is definitely a reason to have a little bit of hope because I mean her track record is remarkable. Like there's nothing fake. Like first of
Yeah.
all, like
She's
I think
great.
again, like on the kind of cultural aesthetic level, this is not your stereotypical millennial who's just looking for attention and like to have a platform. She genuinely seems to be interested in serving the
Hmm.
people. And so like her shtick is not it's not a performance, it's like her actions, like her policy speaks for itself and like does pose a threat to the status quo, which is why so many people wanted her out. So, I mean, it's interesting to me that he actually has given her some kind of position. So, I don't know. I mean, what do you make of her and her track record so far?
Yeah, she like you said, she's almost the political figure that we all want but
Yeah.
haven't gotten. That's
Yeah.
like, actually, I mean, this is like the idea behind Trump was that he would actually I often think like if Trump wanted to rule for the next like however long he lives or his movement, just like raise the minimum wage and do some industrial policy.
Yeah.
Do some anti-monopoly stuff like her. It's just what people are so desperate to see politics do. And I think like I read your piece about her, which was really interesting, where you said like we don't really know about her for a reason.
Yeah.
And I think that's so true and that's so like insightful too. It's like um if there's someone actually challenging the status quo, I mean, in this way that she's saying like these companies um like they control your lives and I'm gonna break them up and like this is I feel like the whole antitrust thing is basically just like the foundation of all of our like capitalist evils in a way. And yeah, I think that's really exciting. Yeah, I don't know where else I was gonna go with that, but I agree with you. I we'll see what she does there.
Yeah, no, we'll see for sure. But I mean, I do want to kind of ask this bigger question though, because okay, like as you're saying, you're using your platform now to critique the establishment, the status quo, which
Yeah.
again, like it's as I keep saying, it's something very refreshing to hear. But like, what hope do you have beyond critiquing or deconstructing? Like, what
Yeah.
can, like, I'm saying, okay, localism, communitarianism, great, but like, what hopes do you have to see something new built, something that's actually good
Yeah.
from the ashes?
I know. Some like yeah, I mean, I think for me, I would love to see like the Democratic Party getting taken over by some left Trump figure. Like I think that's the only way these people get defeated. It was really interesting. I was just learning about this. Like, in 2016, Jill Stein offered Bernie the top of the ticket for the Green Party.
Hmm.
And he said no because he didn't want to end up like Ralph Nader. It's like what else what would have happened if he had said yes? Like I just think it like the third party thing, obviously that's a kind of a fantasy for a lot of people, but like is there a way we get some movement on the left that can infiltrate the Democratic Party that is full of like this kind of Lina Khan type people? I mean, that does feel like kind of a pretty a pipe dream, but if we're talking about like what I actually think or would love to see, um, yeah, and I think that, and I think my a lot of like what motivates me is to help people like see that since I also like worked with these people in the Democrats, that so much of what they rely on to like have any sort of like legitimacy in their project is this performative kind of spectacle, like the shutdown.
Mhm.
And as long as people see the shutdown as like the purpose of politics, then the Democrats have a strategy. Um, and so it's like almost this kind of like psychological, we've been talking about this, but just break from this very, I think it's very clearly dead kind of like technocratic liberalism, but which will, I'm like under no illusion that they will work very hard and they have the power of like the corporate state and the corporate media behind them. So I don't think they're going to be that easily defeated. But I think if there's any promise in a left movement, it's to infiltrate or at least to challenge and if it doesn't go well like maybe actually do the third party thing because I think at the end of the day like what Bernie did is pretty sad just like right endorsing Biden and Hillary. So yeah, I think if I mean the left is in a state, but yeah, what do you I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I do happen to, I don't want to say I place hope in third parties, but I guess I'm attracted to them more as a matter of conscience because, like, I know they won't win, but I don't really feel comfortable voting for
Yeah,
either side. And on a practical level, I do think if third parties get more votes, at least it brings attention to their platform and will cause the mainstream parties to at least question a little bit. I mean,
yeah.
you see that with Ross Perot, that did
Mhm.
kind of shake things up a little bit. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, with Bernie, it's tricky because they're never going to let him win.
Right, they're so
Uh,
powerful.
but what's, I mean, again, like you said, there's something sad. First of all, that he denies the third party ticket, but also it's sad to me that he doesn't really take a strong hand and form these young leftists because part of me doesn't have hope in someone like AOC because again, I think she's
Yeah,
this archetypal narcissistic millennial who really is just completely out of touch with
yeah.
what it means to be a civil servant. But still, he could have formed them to like, enact a real old school kind of leftist populism, not one that's purely aesthetic and surface level. But he didn't. Like he was just like supported them from behind the scenes, but didn't like teach them the ropes. And
Yeah.
I think he could have done a lot more. But, again, I always go back to we have to start with the most immediate. Like if we can build coalitions, institutions on the local level that can, at least in small ways, affect meaningful change, like I think that's our best bet.
Yeah.
Which sounds like it's like it's difficult because that's just not what we're used to, but it's also very simple. I think it's as simple as like get to know the people you live near, get to find out what are the issues that they're dealing with. How could we try to face them together and maybe build some kind of little institutions? It's worth a try because what else are you gonna do? You
Yeah,
know?
exactly. I used to like kind of used to lament people who would say this is the solution. I was like, that can't be it. But now I'm like, they were right. Like that, I mean, that is like first of all something that you can actually do. Like you have agency. And like second of all, I think the only way that we get out of this, because relying on the top down has
Yeah.
clearly proven to be, yeah,
Yeah.
pretty useless.
Yeah. So, all right. So then we plugged your Substack. People should absolutely follow your Substack. Any other things you want to plug?
I do some occasional writing for The Lever, so I encourage people to check them out. They do some great investigative work, especially around like money and politics and stuff. So yeah, but thanks so much for having me, Stephen. I really enjoy your work as well.
Thank you for coming on, Evelyn.